A racist woman destroyed the dress, thinking she was just a black waitress. Her millionaire husband saw it, and the red wine splashed across the white dress like blood on fresh snow. Victoria Hartwell looked at what she'd done with cruel satisfaction as the young waitress tried desperately to wipe the liquid from her skirt. "Oops," Victoria said, faking innocence, her smile showing perfect teeth and a rotten heart. "Too bad that people like you don't know how to move right in civilized places." The Boston Annual Charity Gala brought together the East Coast elite at one of the city's most exclusive hotels. Austrian crystals hung from the ceiling, imported orchids sat on each table, and the quiet sound of a string quartet created the perfect soundtrack for high society hypocrisy. Jasmine Washington was only 24 years old and never thought that taking that extra waitressing job would put her at the center of a racial storm that would change everything. An MBA student at Harvard, she needed the extra money to help her family and pay for her last semester of college. Her natural hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she carried trays with the grace of someone who grew up balancing heavy responsibilities on her shoulders. Victoria Hartwell, on the other hand, was exactly the kind of woman who treated charity events as a personal runway. Wife of real estate tycoon Robert Hartwell, she enjoyed all the benefits of being born rich and marrying even richer. Her life was a constant stream of charity lunches, spa treatments, and shopping trips that cost more than entire families' annual salaries. "I'm sorry, ma'am," Jasmine said with a calmness that surprised even herself, bending down to pick up the pieces of the glass Victoria had supposedly dropped by accident. "I'll have it cleaned up right away." "Don't worry about it," Victoria said loudly enough to get the attention of nearby tables. "I guess accidents are common when you hire these kinds of people for important events." The poison in Victoria's words was so toxic that several people stopped their conversations to watch the scene. Jasmine felt the curious looks, some embarrassed, others clearly entertained by the free show of public humiliation. "Perhaps you should think about more qualified professionals for events of this level," Victoria continued, waving her hands dramatically. "People who naturally understand how to act in refined society." What Victoria didn't know was that every poisonous word was being soaked up by Jasmine with the patience of someone who had survived much worse storms. Raised on the south side of Chicago by a single mother who worked 3 jobs, Jasmine had learned early that true strength doesn't yell, doesn't react. It watches, learns, and acts at the right moment. "Of course, ma'am," Jasmine said, her voice keeping a calmness that made Victoria frown, annoyed by the lack of emotional reaction. "I'll make sure everything is handled properly." As she walked to the kitchen with the broken glass, Jasmine quietly passed the main table, where a distinguished grey-haired man watched the whole scene with an unreadable look. Their eyes met for a split second, and he nodded almost invisibly, as if recognizing something in her that others couldn't see. Robert Hartwell had built a real estate empire based on one simple rule: watch people when they think no one is paying attention, and at that moment, seeing his wife publicly humiliate a young working woman, he saw 2 things clearly: Victoria's true cruel nature and the impressive dignity of that waitress who kept her composure under fire. In the kitchen, Jasmine finally let her hands shake slightly as she threw away the broken pieces. 20 minutes earlier, she had been just another student working to pay the bills. Now she felt a growing determination, as if the universe was setting up something much bigger than a simple night's work. What no one in that fancy hall could have imagined was that the simple waitress Victoria had just attacked held secrets that would turn the humiliation into the spark for a comeback that none of them would ever forget. If you have seen injustices like this and want to see how a single night can turn the lives of those who think they were born superior upside down, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow the story of justice that will prove that underestimating people can cost much more than any fortune. Victoria wasn't done. While Jasmine came back from the kitchen with clean towels and a new uniform, the socialite had found her perfect audience, a circle of high society women who listened to her every word as if she were sharing the secrets of the universe. "Did you see that?" Victoria waved her hands dramatically, her voice full of theatrical outrage. "The nerve of some people to think they can just sneak into our events." Clearly, someone in the organization didn't screen the staff right. Margaret Wellington, heir to a pharmaceutical fortune, nodded hard. "Darling, you are absolutely right. Just yesterday I had to fire a maid because she had the nerve to question my cleaning methods." These people need to understand boundaries. Jasmine came back to the main hall and immediately felt the weight of their stares. Victoria's group had gotten bigger, and she could hear bits of their nasty conversation as she replaced the glasses on the nearby table. Of course, she came back. She probably needs this job desperately. Imagine if it were one of our daughters being forced to work like this. At least she knows her place and didn't try to talk back. Victoria noticed Jasmine nearby and purposely raised her voice. Anyway, girls, I guess we shouldn't be too hard. After all, not everyone is lucky enough to be born with a silver spoon in their mouth and get a proper education. What Victoria didn't know was that Jasmine had graduated summa cum laude in economics from the University of Chicago before getting her spot at Harvard. That she had grown up translating legal papers for her mother, who worked cleaning offices at night to support her 3 children alone. That at 16, she was already managing the family finances and had turned the family's small savings into a fund that paid for her 2 younger brothers' college education. Jasmine finished setting the table in silence, but Margaret decided to add her own part to the public humiliation. "Dear," she spoke to Jasmine directly, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "You understand that workers should stay quiet during events, don't you? Avoid drawing unnecessary attention to themselves." "Yes, ma'am," Jasmine said, keeping respectful but firm eye contact. "I understand perfectly." Something in Jasmine's tone made Margaret frown. There was an articulation, a presence that didn't match the stereotype she expected to find. Victoria noticed her friend's hesitation and decided to push the attack harder. Margaret is right. In fact, Victoria stood up, walking toward Jasmine with a cruel smile. "Perhaps we should have a quick talk about proper protocol. You can read, can't you?" The question was asked with calculated meanness, loud enough for other tables to hear. An awkward silence spread through the nearby area, and Jasmine felt dozens of eyes on her, waiting for her reaction. "Yes, ma'am." "I read perfectly well," Jasmine said, her voice keeping the same professional calm, but something in her eyes shone differently. Victoria laughed, a high-pitched, unpleasant sound. "Great. Then maybe you can read this for us." She grabbed the event menu and held it out to Jasmine loudly. "So we can be sure that the service staff understands exactly what is being served to the important guests." It was a planned and cruel humiliation. Victoria wanted to force Jasmine to embarrass herself, hoping she would stutter, mess up the French words on the menu, or simply refuse and give her reason to call security. Robert Hartwell, who was watching the whole thing from the head table, felt a wave of shame and anger. 23 years of marriage to Victoria had shown him many ugly sides of her personality, but he had never seen her be so openly cruel. Jasmine took the menu with steady hands. For a moment she looked straight at Victoria, and for the first time that evening let a small smile touch the corner of her mouth. "With pleasure, ma'am." And then, to the complete surprise of everyone there, Jasmine began to read the menu, not only smoothly, but with a perfect French pronunciation she had learned during her 2-year exchange program in Lyon, funded by an academic merit scholarship. Amuse-bouche de foie gras poêlé au champagne, suivi par homard rôti aux truffes noires du Périgord. Her voice was clear, confident with a French accent that would make Parisians themselves jealous. The words flowed like music, each syllable said with precision, that showed not only knowledge of the language but close familiarity with French food culture. Victoria slowly went pale as Jasmine continued, realizing that her plan had horribly backfired. Margaret stared with her mouth open, and other women in the group exchanged uncomfortable looks. Et pour terminer, le floating island accompagné d'une crème anglaise à la vanille de Madagascar. Jasmine finished, handing the menu back to Victoria with a calm smile. "I hope that was helpful, ma'am." The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria stood frozen, holding the menu, completely speechless for the first time that evening. It was impossible to deny that this simple waitress had a level of education and class that matched anyone in that room. Robert got up from the head table and walked slowly toward the group. His eyes met Jasmine's for a brief moment, and she saw something in them. Not pity, but respect, and something that looked very much like admiration. "Victoria," he said quietly, his voice carrying a tone she immediately recognized as a warning. "Perhaps it's time we focus on the real purpose of this evening, charity." Victoria quickly pulled herself together, realizing she had lost control of the situation. "Of course, dear. Just trying to make sure everyone understood the proper protocols." Jasmine nodded respectfully and walked away to continue her work, but not before Margaret whispered nervously to Victoria. "Darling, perhaps we misjudged the situation." Victoria grabbed Margaret's arm with too much force. "We didn't misjudge anything," she hissed quietly. "Some tricks don't change who she really is. And before tonight is over, I'll make sure everyone here understands that perfectly well." What Victoria couldn't have imagined was that Jasmine had spent the last 4 years carefully documenting cases of racial discrimination in business settings for her MBA thesis, that she had hidden recording devices, knew civil rights laws inside and out, and that every poisonous word said that night was being carefully recorded. While Victoria planned her next humiliation, Jasmine walked through the room with the calmness of someone carrying a secret too powerful to be shown before the right moment. She had learned at a young age that true strength does not yell. It watches, documents, and acts at exactly the most devastating moment. Robert went back to the main table, but he couldn't stop looking at the young woman he had just seen being attacked by his own wife. There was something about that waitress that interested him deeply. A dignity, an intelligence that couldn't be hidden no matter what uniform she wore. What none of those people could have imagined was that the simple worker Victoria was trying to humiliate was just weeks away from becoming the youngest senior analyst at one of the country's most respected consulting firms, and that every act of discrimination that night was building a case that would turn the humiliation into the spark for a justice none of them would ever forget. Jasmine went to the hotel's fancy bathroom and finally let her hands shake. Not from fear, but from a controlled rush of adrenaline she knew well from her days of defending herself on the streets of Chicago. She carefully took out a small digital recorder from her uniform pocket and checked the recording quality. Crystal clear. 23 minutes of racial slurs, obvious discrimination, and intentional humiliation, all perfectly documented. For her MBA thesis on racial microaggressions in elite business settings, that night had become an academic goldmine. But now, looking at her reflection in the gilded mirror, Jasmine realized that this was much bigger than a simple university research project. "Jasmine." A soft voice knocked on the door. "Are you okay?" It was Robert Hartwell. Jasmine immediately recognized the voice she had heard speaking to the organizers during the event. For a moment, she thought about ignoring him, but something in his genuinely concerned tone made her open the door. Robert stood alone in the hallway, his hands clasped together in a way that showed his nervousness. "I apologize for my wife's completely unacceptable behavior. There is no excuse for what I witnessed." Jasmine studied him carefully. 24 years of life had taught her to tell the difference between fake pity and genuine respect. In Robert's eyes, she saw something she rarely found in white men of his position. Real shame and anger directed at his own family. "Mr. Hartwell, I appreciate your concern, but you don't need to feel responsible for your wife's actions." "Of course I do," Robert said firmly. 23 years of marriage have given me many chances to correct behavior like this, and I have failed miserably. "Jasmine, may I ask you a direct question?" She nodded, curious. "You're not really a waitress, are you?" Jasmine smiled for the first time that evening. "What makes you think that? Your French is better than anyone else's in that room, including professors from top universities I know. Your posture, your way of speaking, the way you keep your dignity under attack." Robert paused. "Besides, I recognize intelligence when I see it." "I'm an MBA student at Harvard," Jasmine admitted. "I work as a waitress to help my family and finish my studies." Robert closed his eyes, clearly thinking about how serious the situation was. "Harvard? My God, Jasmine." Victoria attacked a Harvard student out of pure racial prejudice. "Mr. Hartwell, this happens more often than you realize. Your wife simply said out loud what many people think silently." "That doesn't make it acceptable," Robert said, his voice full of an emotion that surprised Jasmine. "In fact, it makes it much worse. May I ask what your area of study is at Harvard?" "Analysis of systemic discrimination in business settings. I'm finishing a thesis on how prejudice affects professional opportunities for minorities." Robert was silent for a long moment. "Jasmine, may I make a proposal?" "That might sound strange." 15 minutes later, they were sitting in a private corner of the hotel lobby, away from the watching eyes of the event. Robert had ordered 2 coffees and spoke in a low voice, as if plotting. "My company, Hartwell Development, has been facing serious diversity issues. The board is pushing for real change, not just surface level, especially after some recent incidents. Jasmine listened closely, her academic instincts picking up on every detail. I need someone with your knowledge to do a complete audit of our hiring practices, promotions and company culture. Someone who understands both the theory and reality of discrimination in the workplace. Mr. Hartwell, that's very generous, but it's not generosity, Jasmine. It's urgent necessity and self-interest. My company needs real change, and you clearly have the knowledge and experience to make it happen. Robert slid a card across the table. External consulting payment, matching market standards for specialists of your skill level. You would keep complete control over methods and conclusions. Jasmine took the card, feeling the weight of the possibilities. Why are you doing this? Because I spent 23 years living with a woman whose prejudices I silently accepted. Because I built a company that probably has the same system-wide problems you study. And because honestly, after what I saw today, I need to do something meaningful to fix the damage my family causes in the world. At that moment, Victoria appeared in the lobby looking for her husband. When she saw him talking to Jasmine, her face turned into a mask of barely hidden fury. "Robert, dear," she said, walking to the table with a forced smile. "I was looking for you. What are you doing here with her?" "Victoria, I'm offering Jasmine a position as a consultant at the company." The silence that followed was thick with tension. Victoria looked between her husband and Jasmine as if she had just witnessed him cheating. "You're joking, right?" Victoria laughed, but the sound came out high-pitched and nervous. "Robert, she's a waitress. She's an MBA student at Harvard, specializing in exactly the area where our company needs help." Victoria clearly went pale. "Harvard, yes, Victoria. The woman you publicly humiliated tonight is a highly qualified academic who is working here to help her family." Jasmine watched the back and forth between the couple with the clinical eye of someone who studies social behavior. Victoria was clearly in shock, but also quickly figuring out how to reduce the damage to her reputation. "Well, Robert, even if that's true, it doesn't mean we should make hasty decisions based on feelings of guilt." "It's not guilt, Victoria. It's recognition of skill and real business need." Victoria spoke to Jasmine directly for the first time since the initial humiliation. "Darling, I'm sure you understand that sometimes misunderstandings happen at social events. Perhaps we should all just forget about tonight's minor disagreements." Victoria's desperate try to downplay her cruelty as a misunderstanding was so obvious that Jasmine almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "Ms. Hartwell, there was no misunderstanding. Your comments were very clear and direct." Victoria forced another smile. "Of course, dear, but intelligent people like you surely understand that sometimes social context can be complicated." "Actually," Jasmine said calmly, "people with my academic background tend to be very exact about context and meaning, especially when it comes to documented racial discrimination." The word documented made Victoria pull back slightly. Documented. Robert watched his wife's face and understood immediately. "Victoria, were you recorded?" Jasmine neither confirmed nor denied it, but her meaningful silence said it all. Victoria began to understand that this evening had become much more complicated than a simple humiliation of an employee. "Jasmine," Robert said, getting up from the table, "I await your response to the consulting proposal. My assistant will contact you tomorrow with the contract details." As the couple walked away, Jasmine could hear the start of a heated argument. Victoria had realized too late that she had attacked the wrong person at the wrong time in the wrong way. Back in the bathroom, Jasmine checked the recorder again and smiled. 23 minutes of obvious racial discrimination, followed by 15 minutes of a desperate attempt at damage control. For her thesis, this was gold. For her career, it was an unexpected chance to make real change at an important company. But as she got ready to return to the dining room and finish her night's work, Jasmine felt that something much bigger was taking shape. The humiliation Victoria had tried to force on her was becoming the foundation of something that would change not only her own life, but potentially the culture of an entire company. What Victoria didn't yet understand was that she had attacked not just a waitress, but a future expert on business discrimination who would now have direct access to her own husband's company's internal systems. The irony was delicious, but Jasmine knew that true justice would come through careful work, system-wide change, and measurable results. As she checked her reflection one last time, Jasmine realized that tonight had marked the end of one phase of her life and the beginning of something completely new. Victoria had tried to put her in her place, not knowing that she was actually launching her into a position of power that she would use to make sure that others never had to go through the same humiliation. The waitress was about to become the consultant, and when that happened, it would be Victoria who would find out where she really belonged in a world where skill and character mattered more than inherited privileges. 3 weeks later, Victoria Hartwell woke up with a strange feeling in her stomach. Her phone showed 47 missed calls and hundreds of unread messages. When she opened the first link Margaret had sent at 6 o'clock in the morning, she felt as if the ground had opened up beneath her feet. Business executive attacked for racial discrimination. Viral audio exposes Boston elite, screamed the Boston Herald headline. Below it was a photo of her at the gala event, her look of disdain frozen for eternity. The 23-minute audio was being played on every major radio station in the city. Every nasty word she had said against Jasmine echoed crystal clear over the airwaves, along with angry comments from hosts and devastating testimony from people who had witnessed the scene. Victoria ran down the stairs, finding Robert in the kitchen with a cup of coffee and a look she had never seen before. "Cold, distant final. Robert, you have to do something," she cried, waving her cell phone. "This is a planned attack. That waitress is trying to destroy us." "Victoria," Robert said calmly without looking up from his newspaper, "that waitress is now our new corporate diversity consultant. And after listening to this audio, I completely understand why our company desperately needs her services." Victoria froze. "What did you say?" Jasmine started yesterday. "Her first project will be a complete audit of our company culture, including analysis of all employees in leadership positions." Robert finally looked at her. "I imagine you understand the implications." At that moment, Victoria's phone rang. It was Patricia Whitmore, chair of the board of the tennis club where Victoria had been a member for 15 years. "Victoria, the board met in emergency session this morning," Patricia said without small talk. "Your membership has been cancelled effective immediately. The behavior in the audio recording is incompatible with our values." Before Victoria could respond, the call ended. Then her phone exploded with notifications. The WhatsApp group Ladies Who Lunch, her social elite, was buzzing with messages all about her. "I can't believe I've been around someone like that for years. My daughter goes to Harvard. I wonder how many Jasmines she's humiliated without us knowing. James said he doesn't want to do business with Hartwell Development anymore." Victoria opened her Instagram account and discovered she had lost 3,000 followers overnight. The comments on her latest photos were devastating. "What a disgusting person. Rich racist exposed. I hope she learned something from this." Margaret called crying. "Victoria, Charles cancelled the contract for the office we were renovating. He said he doesn't want to be associated with toxic elements. I'm socially ruined." By this point, Victoria was hyperventilating. "Robert, you have to make that audio disappear. Sue that woman. Do something." Robert slowly stood up. "Victoria, you recorded this. Every word came out of your mouth. There's nothing to sue except your own cruelty." The phone rang again. It was Dr. Harrison, director of the charitable foundation, where Victoria had served as volunteer vice president for 8 years. "Victoria, the board has voted unanimously to remove you from all positions." Effective immediately, his voice was icy. "Frankly, discovering that one of our leaders expressed such discrimination was shocking to all of us." Victoria collapsed into a chair. In less than 24 hours, she had lost her social standing, her friendships, her charity commitments, and the trust of her own community. "You know what the most ironic part is?" Robert said, folding the newspaper. "Jasmine didn't even have to do anything. She just documented your true nature and let your own words speak for themselves." At that very moment, Jasmine was at the Hartwell Development Office, being introduced to the Human Resources team, dressed in a sharp suit and carrying a briefcase full of proposals for structural changes. She had gone from humiliated waitress to respected consultant in less than a month. Starting today, Robert announced during the department meeting, Jasmine Washington will lead our diversity and inclusion initiative. She has full authority to implement necessary changes in our company culture. The employees greeted her with respectful curiosity. Many had heard the viral audio and understood the significance of her hiring. Jasmine spoke to the team with the same calmness she had kept during the humiliation. My goal is not to punish anyone, but to create an environment where everyone feels valued and respected, regardless of their background or appearance. Meanwhile, Victoria stayed locked in her home, watching her social life fall apart through social media. Each notification brought a new humiliation: cancelled invitations, lost friendships, doors closing. Margaret had stopped answering her calls. Patricia Whitmore posted a photo from the tennis club with a caption celebrating our true values of inclusion and respect. Even her hairdresser had cancelled her appointments, claiming to be fully booked. Robert went up to the bedroom that night and found Victoria crying in front of the mirror. 23 years, he said simply. 23 years I lived with this person and pretended not to see. Robert, please, can we talk about this? It was a terrible misunderstanding. Victoria, it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was you being exactly who you always were. But this time someone was recording it. He walked over to the closet and began removing his clothes. My lawyers will deliver the divorce papers tomorrow. The house is yours, but our shared assets will be divided according to the court's ruling. Victoria stood up desperately. You can't be serious because of a waitress. Because of a Harvard student you attacked out of pure racial prejudice, Robert corrected. Because of 23 years of tolerating your cruelty. Because of discovering that my wife is exactly the kind of person I've always despised. As Robert packed his bags, Victoria finally understood the size of what she had lost. Not just a marriage, but her entire social identity built on foundations of privilege that now proved as fragile as glass. The next morning, Jasmine woke up in her apartment near Harvard, preparing for another day of work that would change not only her own life, but potentially the culture of an entire company. Her phone showed messages of support from colleagues, professors, and even strangers who had heard her story. What had started as a night of extra work to pay the bills had turned into a chance to make real, measurable, and lasting change. And all because a privileged woman had completely underestimated who she was attacking. While Victoria faced the collapse of her previous life, Jasmine walked confidently toward a future she would build with skill, dignity, and the strength that comes from turning humiliation into purpose. The waitress Victoria had tried to put in her place was about to redefine what it really meant to hold a position of power and use it for good. 6 months later, Jasmine was promoted to Director of Diversity at Hartwell Development, implementing policies that became a national model. Her private consulting business grew exponentially, serving large corporations seeking real change. Victoria lived isolated in her empty mansion. Divorced, friendless, banished from the social circles she once dominated. Her pleas for forgiveness on social media only generated more criticism. Desperate attempts to rebuild her image failed systematically. Robert married a civil rights lawyer and donated half his fortune to college scholarships for students like Jasmine. At the Harvard graduation ceremony, Jasmine addressed hundreds of students. Never let anyone define your worth based on prejudice. The best revenge is success they never imagined possible. Victoria's audio still circulated as an example in classes on racial discrimination. Her cruelty had become a case study on the consequences of prejudice. Jasmine turned humiliation into purpose, building a legacy that would change lives for generations. If you believe that no one should be judged by the color of their skin or their origin, subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove that underestimating people can cost much more than any fortune.